Open your mind's eye to me, proselyte. Our agenda is proceeding smoothly. The persistent American pursuers have been driven back temporarily in Africa. For now, Rashidi will be allowed to continue on his work uninterrupted, and he will have plenty of time to do so, for the Soviets and Allies are still clawing at each other's throats. I had planned the death of Boris at the start of the war, so that the Russians would lack the, how do the Americans put it, X factor, to aid in their advance. This meant that they would have to rely on our help to close out the war, and so far, things have gone exactly as I envisioned. My psychic beacon project has proven successful. A single one of it is now controlling all of the remaining American resistance in New York City. With the pace of the war slowing down, the High Command would have no choice but to rely on my technology. Our plans will then safely proceed right under their noses. Keep your faith in me, proselyte, for this is only the beginning.
In a surprising turn of events, the Pacific Front, which was supposedly docile thanks to sympathies with Europe, joined the Third Great War, launching a daring attack against Russia in the Far East. Worse still, the Russians' allies, the People's Republic of China, who were supposed to guarantee their backside, have ignored their hails for help. With over half of their forces in America and the rest at Europe's borders or sweeping into the Middle East, the High Command had no choice but to summon the Soviet general back from the front lines in America to help defend their vulnerable motherland. Luckily, development had just finished on a new unit based on the designs stolen from the Allies 10 years ago. The Terror Drones, nimble robots equipped with razor-sharp cutting devices, deadly to infantry and vehicles alike. The defenders suffered heavy losses initially due to improper supply storage and the betrayal of some of the local Russian forces still loyal to the White Movement. Still, the Soviet general managed to turn the tide of the battle and repelled the invaders at Vladivostok just before the delayed arrival of China's token reinforcements. And while the Pacific Front forces managed to take down Nogorsk, thanks again to the Russian defectors who had close ties with them, a brave group of pyros rose to the occasion and burned the Allied forces there to a crisp, fully restoring Russia's control over the Far East for now. Curiously, the Pacific Front stopped their invasion attempts after their initial failures, despite still having the ability to do so, a decision most perplexing to the Russian High Command. But they have no time to dwell on the true intentions of the Pacific Front. For now, they must refocus their efforts on the other theaters. Several weeks have gone by since the assassination of President Dugin, and things are starting to take a turn for the worse for the Soviets. Against all odds, the Euro Alliance managed to retake and hold their naval base in the city of Klaipėda, Greece, robbing the Soviets of a strategic springboard required to propagate their influence in the Mediterranean Sea, effectively delaying their invasion of Europe. Elsewhere, the Americans are starting to pick up the broken pieces of their resistance. The usage of white phosphorus weapons amongst the Confederation forces had caught the attention of the Americans, who have identified the location of their production facilities in Tamaulipas, Mexico. In a swift raid conducted by a small task force led by Tanya and 2 American commanders, they managed to destroy the factories, removing it from the Confederation's arsenal. The retaking of the Mayport shipyard also gave the Southern American fleet a major upper hand in their battles, scoring victory after victory in the East Coast, and nearly wiping out all of the regional Confederation naval presence in their engagements. This, along with the Americans' re-established air superiority, meant that the Soviets had no choice but to concede nearly all the territories they had taken in the southern states along the East Coast. On the other side, little progress had been made in the West Coast due to the double strangulation from the Pacific Fleet and the Storm Children squadrons. With the training and arming of the first wave of US volunteers finished, the conflict may soon devolve into a war of attrition. Although Yuri's mass mind control machine, the Psychic Beacon, which has proven effective in New York, could theoretically counter the second wind, its construction in additional cities would first require Soviet dominance in the East Coast to provide a safety net. Unfortunately for the Soviets, the US has rallied their naval forces in the Caribbean islands, assembling a sizable aircraft carrier fleet in the Bahamas, and are planning to link up with the remaining American vessels in the East Coast. If allowed to succeed, this will seriously hinder the Soviets' access to the States by sea and threaten the safety of the psychic beacons the Russians plan to construct. Without troops to spare, the High Command calls on Yuri for assistance, and the Psi Corps obliged, dispatching a task force to the area under the command of the proselyte. to protect the Bahamian carrier fleet until they're ready for departure. The local American commanding officer decided to set up an expansion post in the area, a decision that will prove fatal, as the Psi Corps agents launched a surprise attack against the expansion force and wrested control of an Allied mobile construction vehicle. This meant that the Psi Corps, which should be all but powerless in such a head-on confrontation under normal circumstances, is instead able to commandeer a fresh batch of American equipment, rivaling their enemies in the area. As if the situation couldn't get any worse, the proselyte accidentally stumbled upon a secret American lab during the operation and discovered that the Americans are secretly researching the Pacific Front's Zephyr artillery here. The proselyte ordered his man to loot the blueprints to the valuable artillery platform and, using their enemies' weapons against them, managed to sink the entirety of the Bahamian fleet before they were even given a chance to shine. The remnants in the area were summarily dealt with. With them out of the way, Russia is free to move on with their psychic beacon constructions, sending the bulk of their remaining forces in the east coast inland to pave the way for the beacons. Placing too much on the possibility of threats from the sea, however, the Russians neglected their defenses on land, relying primarily on the forces mind-controlled by the psychic beacon to thwart any ground attempts to retake New York City. This folly was unintentionally perceived by the Americans, who noticed an unusually large number of what they assumed to be American equipment operated by Russian forces, more than what they should be capable of. This puzzled the Americans, who were already suspecting something was amiss after the Russians started spreading propaganda showing American forces willingly joining the Soviet side. To investigate this anomaly, a small reconnaissance team was sent into the city, but contact with them abruptly ended after a short while. Eager to crack open the case, the Allied commander was summarily summoned here. When he found the missing reconnaissance team, they were unable to be reasoned with and started firing back at the commander's forces. The team was reluctantly executed. But instead of turning back, the Allied commander decided to push deeper into the city, swiftly breaking through the Russian defenses and reaching the unknown structure located within the city. He ordered his forces to capture the device, which stopped it from functioning, freeing the mind-controlled American forces in the city. Wanting to study the device's powers further, the Pentagon ordered the Allied commander to secure enough power plants in the city to bring the device online once again. As the commander did so, the device's mind waves temporarily turned the Russian forces in the city to the American side.
Comrade?
Much to the US command's dismay, however, their engineers had no idea how to keep the device operational. Without proper maintenance, the psychic beacon blew up shortly after, releasing the Russians from its control. With the mysterious device out of the way, the main US forces had no choice but to eliminate the remaining Russians. Despite the self-destruction of the psychic beacon, the implications of what the US had discovered here are monumental to say the least. The destruction of the peacekeeper silos, the mysterious defeat of the Bahamian fleet to their own forces, and the previously presumed defection of certain American troops. It all made sense now. If the Soviets managed to deploy this horrifying technology on a large scale, not only is the United States doomed, but the very notion of free will would be in jeopardy. This discovery could not have come at a more urgent time, as their intelligence web has uncovered the true intent behind the recent Soviet movements. The remaining Russian and Confederation forces, cut off from their main means of reinforcement from sea, are already scrambling to construct additional psychic beacons to prevent themselves from being routed. These insidious devices were successfully erected in two locations simultaneously, St. Louis and Chicago, key American cities in the Midwest region, which is the epicenter of production for America. Worse still, another device, unknown to the Americans, is sited within Chicago, a large structure known to the Soviets as the Psychic Amplifier. It is clear to the Allies that the device is of great significance to the Russians, who have gone so far as to deploy a working model of their next-generation Iron Curtain device to shield the structure. As the Americans correctly suspected, the device serves as a control hub and range booster for the psychic beacons. While dormant at the moment, its successful activation would subdue a considerable chunk of America and seal their defeat, an outcome most undesired by them. If they are to have any chance of freeing themselves from the Soviet scums, then this is the battle to win. Entrusting the retaking of St. Louis to its regional defenders, the Pentagon focused its efforts on the greater threat. To guarantee the success of the retaking of Chicago, a massive number of American forces were sent in across Lake Michigan, pulling in nearly all the American military personnel in the East Coast, with many more in the northern states heading here as well. With the Allied commander at the helm, the Soviets were unable to prevent the destruction of the psychic beacon at the shore, freeing the local American soldiers. With their combined strength, they continued pushing towards the psychic amplifier. The US command put everything on the line, dispatching a large number of infantry armed with their newest Comet Prism rifle, and going so far as to authorize the use of the Strato Fortress strategic bomber on their own city. A fierce battle ensued, and eventually, the psychic amplifier was destroyed, preventing its activation. The Allied commander finally breathed a sign of relief. Just moments ago, the fate of the entire country was hanging by a thread. Yet through great effort, the biggest threat they have faced thus far has finally been resolved. Once they eliminate the remainder of the Soviets in Chicago and St. Louis, they would have completely retaken the East Coast. This victory should be cause for celebration, as it could mark the moment that the US regained the upper hand in the conflict, the turning point in the Third Great War, With a single ICBM strike, armed with Russia's own Midas nuclear warhead, the entire city of Chicago was wiped off the face of the earth in a blinding flash, the majority of the US forces along with it. Those that survived tried to rendezvous in St. Louis, only to be greeted by yet another horrifying news. The Soviet general was able to stall the local American forces long enough for the activation of the beacon. When it rains, it pours. How is it that the Russians have the guidance system necessary to launch ICBM strikes? They weren't even given any chances to launch their own satellites after their defeat in the previous war, and their rebuilding efforts since the start of this one are still well underway. Unless it was the TV satellite. The Russians must have snuck the launch systems aboard it. With their mind control powers, it would have been a piece of cake to do so. The realization nearly broke the US command, as their disingenuous attempt at peace so many years ago became the deciding factor in their downfall. This singular blow crippled the Americans, and the Allied commander could do naught but watch the Soviet war machine march into their country unimpeded. The Pentagon, left relatively defenseless, was easily taken by the reinforcing Russians, who then occupied most of the major cities afterwards. The Confederation, too, joined the plundering, seizing much of the remaining American aeronautics facilities and the experimental prototypes in the country. With their central leadership collapsed, the remaining American forces were left to fend for themselves. Many escaped to remote bases beyond the mainland in hopes of regrouping for a future counterattack. The rest chose to keep fighting in the country, their resolve only hardened by the tragedy. Though without proper command and control, what these pockets of resistance can accomplish still remains to be seen. This was the turning point of the Third Great War, just not the one the Americans were envisioning.